You're listening to the Tony Conley Morning Show on More Compelling Talk Radio, 1320 WILS, 1320WILS.com. At first glance, the Facebook profile is a perfect description, purportedly belonging to a brown-haired woman named Sandra Prince. And it shows her driving her car, a white BMW, hugging two young children. Now, if someone were to stumble across the profile, which still exists, there would be a little way for them to know the truth. The profile is fake. Let's learn a little bit more about the DEA being sued for creating this fake Facebook profile. Brian Bouffard is a legal expert for 1320 WILS and Fox News Radio. Brian, how are you?
Good morning, Tony.
Tell us about this story. Take us to the beginning.
Well, you laid it out exactly right, that if you look today, that's what you'd see. And the way that came about is the DEA was investigating this woman as potentially being part of a drug ring. So in the course of their investigation, they spoke with her. They asked for her permission to look at her phone to remove certain items of evidentiary significance. And that's, there's nothing unusual about that. That's fairly common. What they did, though, was beyond the pale, and that is once they had her phone, they went in and they harvested her personal information, her personal info, her pictures, as you say, of her young children, and essentially stole her identity, which is a crime for you and me, but not for the government, and put her up there and essentially are using her as bait, all without her knowledge and without her permission. So it's a huge problem, and I think it's something that we all ought to be very, very concerned about.
Is this legal?
It's not legal. It's not legal to do something like that without somebody's permission. I mean, essentially, like I said, they've committed the offense of identity theft, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what kind of rationale the government comes forth with to try to explain that this is all okay, because it's not okay.
Okay, if it's not okay, when the government breaks the law, who prosecutes the government?
Well, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it's the concept of, hey, we investigated ourselves and found we did nothing wrong. It's the government who tries to control its own henhouse, and they are the fox in that henhouse. And so all of us, there's several things we can do about this. Number one is we can make better choices at the ballot box. But, on a more individual level, make law enforcement do its job. Don't consent to searches. Make them jump through the proper hoops that they need to do to make sure that everything is legal and appropriate, because, the more leeway you give them, the more leeway they will take from you, and it's not right.
Does the end justify the means from their perspective of trying to, find the bad guys?
I think that's exactly the way they look at it, and I think that history has clearly shown, and just a remote, rudimentary sense of morality and ethics will tell us that the end does not justify the means, that the government is supposed to do not only, what's right, but to go through proper legal and ethical means to get there. And unfortunately, we see it, we're seeing it here, and we see it in a lot of areas in which the government feels that, because they have the power to do something, that it's therefore, right for them to do it. And that's a mistake that most of us learned in kindergarten, and the government still apparently has yet to learn.
So where are we with this story, and what happens next?
Well, her lawsuit is going to wend its way forth, and I hope I don't know the specifics of who her attorney is or what their plan is, but I certainly hope that they stay in it for the long haul. I hope, just as a citizen, that this isn't something that gets settled and swept under the rug, because this is exactly the kind of thing that is happening, in response to this, ludicrous drug war that we've been in for decades.
What do you mean by that, Brian?
Well, nobody is as good as declaring war on abstract concepts as we are, as Americans. The drug war, to me, is based on a flawed premise, at least in regard to certain drugs like marijuana. But, at some point you have to count the cost, and you have to say, you have to be willing to say, well, is what we're doing making the problem worse? And I think that, what we've seen in Mexico with the drug cartels and our incarceration rate in this country, I think that pretty much definitively shows that. But our elected officials disagree.
Sounds like you think marijuana should be legalized.
I do. I think Colorado and Washington are setting the good example, and I think that if you look at what's going on in those two states in the time that they have had legalized marijuana, you've seen a crime rate that has not increased. You've seen tax rates that have increased, or tax revenues for the government. So, to me, it's a no-brainer. And I think anybody who takes a look at and compares marijuana and alcohol ought to come to the same conclusion.
Brian Bouffard is a legal expert for 1320 WILS and Fox News Radio. Brian, thanks so much.
Anytime.
And thanks to you for listening to the Tony Conley Morning Show on More Compelling Talk Radio, 1320 WILS and 1320WILS.com.